This is part 3 of my interview with Drew Thornton, the front of house mixer with Billie Eilish. In this chapter, Drew goes into some technical detail of setting up and mixing that live show. There's a table of contents on the left side of the screen. You can use that as a guide if you want to skip through and play sections that you find more interesting. We join the conversation already in progress. My sort of experience with like being involved with large venues is, like I said, back when I used to be recording stuff in a remote truck. And I got to say that my experience, especially like when I would go over to Europe and do stuff, was the road crews are just monsters. I mean, they are such badass professionals. They're like an army, especially like the riggers. You know, I did a gig in Leningrad that was twice the size of the Madison Square Garden, twice the height, and they're hanging down there, hanging speakers and shit. But they just seem to work with such a military precision. First of all, how big is your crew?
So this crew on the last tour, the one that just postponed, we were at 75, I think, between 70 and 75.
And how much do you carry as far as lights and sound equipment?
Well, everything. This one.
You carry everything. This the States?
Yeah, this was a U.S. tour, and I think we were at, I could be wrong, don't quote me, but I think we are at 16 trucks.
Wow, that was my next question.
Yeah, 16 trucks. Yeah, 2 for audio. Yeah.
An aside question. I always thought, my reference to how badass the crews were, I also found that when I was involved in it, they tend to fall into 2 camps. It was like work hard, play hard, and then there was the sober camp. Do you know what I mean? But there wasn't much in between.
It's still exactly the same.
I think the sober camp used to be work hard, play hard until they got tired of it. And then they went pure sober. But so Billie Eilish is young. So does that affect the tone of the crew at all? I mean, does that somehow shift things or?
Well, okay. So when I first came on, we kind of started the majority of the early touring was five crew guys. That's including the tour manager. And I do remember we did have several venues, not only in Europe, but also in the States where there wasn't alcohol sold at the venue, and there wasn't alcohol in the green rooms if we even had a room. So if it was always on the bus. And for me, I came on so where we never actually rode the bus together. There was always when I came on, we were doing a family bus and a crew bus. And that was always the situation because the whole family tours with Billy. Like it's the dad, the mom, the brother, because Finn writes all of he's a co-write for most of all of it. He plays most everything on the records. He produces everything and he plays it all live too. He's 22 years old. He's a freak of nature. He's amazing. I mean, incredible. So you have to think about on a 12-person crew or a 12 bus, having that many people off the get-go just for the artist. And you're talking about a drummer as well. So it's you got 5 or 6 there. And then you got to add a crew. It's you're pushing the boundaries. So they kind of opted to do 2 buses once we were kind of doing more touring in the States. So in the beginning, it was okay, no alcohol in the green rooms, some of the green rooms, and all the booze on the bus. And the vibe was always the family doesn't really drink. The dad will have a beer or 2 sometimes with the crew because the dad, Patrick, is pretty interesting. He's pretty much had almost every job on the tour. And every single time we do another tour, they always, unfortunately, hire someone to do his job. You know what I mean? That's, that's literally, that's all they do. So he started out as the lighting tech, actually the LD. And then he was the lighting tech. Then he was more Finn's tech. And then we got a tech for Finn. So then he had to move over to a stage carp kind of situation. So now he's kind of set in that kind of thing.
He's got a career as a tour manager. He's going to know it's like getting qualified on a submarine where you have to learn every job.
It's amazing. And I mean, he loves it. I think he just wants, it's one of those things where if the family's going to be there, he feels kind of a want and need to do something, be a part of it. And I love that because he's such a great guy, and the family is fantastic.
Yeah.
But like I said, they don't drink. I don't think I've never seen Maggie drink anything. And I think I might have seen Finn once he turned 21. I think he had I saw him drink one beer. You know what I mean?
Right.
So for all of us too, it was kind of also unspoken. We just kind of like didn't really like try to make that a forefront. And plus, I think a lot of us are my age and older. So you're like talking about 30s to 40s. So you're like, you're not really wanting to party.
Yeah.
You're kind of more focused on just doing a great job and like sleeping. And, on those early tours, that was a lot of work. I was production managing. So, it's just, that was a lot of work to do because every single show that she's even up to this point, it's like always feels like it's 6 months behind. Like she's already 6 months bigger than she was already before they did the tour. So the budgets are always off, but they're always trying to do the biggest splash because they want to do this big show because she's so electric, and it's like you're fueling this fire, and it's such a good way to operate, but it's really tough to be a part of that, sometimes. And luckily I'm only front of house guy now. So it's like, I love it.
So, is it still the same kind of deal where you load out, hop on the bus, drive overnight, check into a hotel in the morning, and then set up? How long does the setup take?
Usually they'll chalk the floors at 6 a.m. And then 7 a.m. they'll start load in. And then I'm supposed to be getting a tuned PA around 1 in the afternoon. So my
That's
system
fast.
engineer,
they get it up that fast.
Usually what ended up happening is the PA gets loaded in, the core crew from the audio company comes in, they hang the PA, then I'll come in, I'll tip my consoles, set up my rig, and then by that time, the PA angle should be right, the calculations should be correct for the coverage of the room, and the system engineer will probably start tuning around noon to kind of get the PA to sound the way I want it to sound. And then I'll come in and then I'll listen to it and make sure it's doing what I want it to do. And while I'm doing that, he'll generally check other zones to make sure everything's covered.
So that was,
So,
I was used to the old school where they used to just, ring it out, get it to feedback, notch those frequencies, and then tune it to their liking. At this point, is that all software based? And also, I'm not aware of what sort of, feedback elimination you have that you can use.
So usually on a normal gig, I wouldn't say that that's a requirement at all. These days, the PAs are so efficient and so directional. It's fascinating. I was taking out a rig from Acoustics, and it was primarily what they call the K1, which is a dual 15 box, and K2, which is a dual 12 box with adjustable horizontal dispersion fins. So you can literally steer the HF any way. You could go 90, 70, 120, I think, and you could go 120 either on stage, off stage. And then there was a smaller box, Cara. And all of they use this program called Sound Vision, and they basically take the 3D dimensions of the venue, they plug it in. They plug it in.
So they know the resonances and everything already.
It's crazy. So they'll take into consideration your trim from the floor, like how hard, what PA you have, because it's an Acoustics based software. So you can plug in the exact PA, the exact points and its relations to the aux hang, the 270 hang, and the flown subs and the subs on the ground. And you could kind of get a good coverage of like within 2 dB. We're talking a different of 2 dB coverage across the entire arena. It also pushes very specific information to the drivers and to what their other software called LA Network Manager. So their network manager, because now everything is networked, their entire speaker system is networked together. So you basically run Dante to control all of these individual amps to do certain things. So the whole idea is you can literally go into Sound Vision, get the play with all these different ideas of how you want the coverage to go, and it'll literally do these algorithms to maximize the power and efficiency of the rig. And then it will literally dump it into LA network, and then you can dump that to the amps. So the idea is most of the work is done offline at this point by your system engineer. And so then when I walk in, I'm usually, what I'll do is if I'm starting from scratch or whatever, I'll generally have like my SE or whoever's in charge of the PA. I'll have them turn off everything except for the main left right. And I'll usually have, this is the time where I've actually given up some control, but usually I'll run it like a left, right, and sub, and they'll matrix off my left, right feed to feed all the other matrices. And if there's like a bar feed, I'll send them a separate feed that isn't like, hacked to hell or whatever.
Right.
So, and usually those matrices feed what they call like a speaker processor from Lake, an LM44. So I got one of those in my own personal rig at this point, and I have two of them in my rig from Claire. So then I'll be able to go in, and it's kind of similar to those drive racks from DBX, but you can go in and you can have Mesa filters. They're like they're supposed to have no phase distortion between whatever points they have, and they're supposed to be very phase coherent and very accurate EQs. So you can literally do 1,000 EQs you wanted to do, like super narrow, super wide, like as crazy as 24 dB up or down, the high shelf, all kinds of EQs, whatever crazy shape your heart desires. But generally, I won't generally have to do that. But I'll go in, I'll usually take the time to just listen to the left, right, have all the speakers muted, so I know that I'm not pulling too much. For Billie, it's a very particular thing. It's one of the more challenging mixes I've ever had to do because she's so quiet.
Yeah. And that's a question I'm going to get to. But a question I have for you is, so when you first listen to the system, is that like doing a virtual sound check? Are you playing back a multi-track, or are you?
I do eventually, but I start with a couple
Back
songs
in Black. You start with Back in Black.
No, I did. I used to.
You start with Line 'Em Up. I don't know if you'll get that joke.
Dude, I used to love like I need to kick it back, but at a certain point you start using what makes the most sense. I used to tune with Shoot the Thrill into Back to Black because they were, to me, I thought one of the best sounding records you could really like use. These days I kind of opt to stick to where my genre is because of the low end information.
Yeah. I mean, I used to when I was tuning speakers in the studio, I'd go from Back to Black to like Erykah Badu, and the thing was because I needed, but I would tune it to like the
low end,
to Erykah Badu, and then if I got killed when I went over to AC/DC, I knew I went too far, So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I mean, I actually the crazy thing about it is I've become to be very fond of Serban Gania's mixes. He does a lot of in the box mix, but I've kind of come to love his low end. It's very clean. Like I feel it coming. 24 Karat Magic. There's a song he did, Best for You, for Maroon 5.
Right.
It's got tons of low end, and to me, it's like Billie's always. She's only told me two things ever for like mix critiques, and one of them was on an Instagram video, and it was like, "Hey, can you just turn the background vocals up on this one song?" I'm like, "Yeah, totally." But also when she's out front, she's like, I want more low end. She wants a hip hop low end,
Yeah.
So that was one of the things where it kind of geared me to doing more modern, super compressed, very exaggerated mixes. So
in-ears just must make life so much easier. Are you still
sometimes?
No. But what I'm saying is, from the live recordings I've done, I solo most of the mics. If you're in a venue, it's 50% the audio you want and 50% everything else. So in-ears must really help with that. Are you still using any physical stage monitors for like feel or anything, or?
No, because before last year, I was console or PA du jour. So I didn't have a PA, and we were a 9-truck tour last year, 9 trucks and no PA.
Wow.
Which was brutal. So that was kind of but I had been used to it so long. Like I've never had a PA of my own, and I've always had to do the same thing over. So it wasn't. I was fine, and I think that was one of the things that has been keeping me up. And people like, especially of like the production manager team and whatnot, they understand that like, oh well, he can do somewhat the same show on every single speaker, and not every engineer is that versatile sometimes.
Right.
So it's I learned a lot too about my mixing and how it translates between, and it made me more aware of the choice when I decided what speakers to take out this year.
Now, when you, again, it could be an old school question, but so the split between the monitor and front of house, is that a pure digital? And if so, who controls the preamp, or do you actually multi the analog mic signal?
So on this tour, it's actually a split at the copper. So we literally have isolated, isolated split from front of house and monitors. When we started, we were actually doing a digital gain sharing situation because we had such a small crew. When it was 5 people, we had literally, they had these little tiny powered active stage boxes, and they just take one Cat 5. You just throw up on a riser, and they're so great for festivals because then you don't have to worry about someone screwing up the patch. You have a 15-minute changeover. All you do is just like get power and plug the Cat 5 in and done. You know what I mean? You can patch all day behind, and that's it.
So when you're doing a festival, let's say there's a bunch of acts, and you come in with your console, do you just give them an Ethernet out that's got a mix, or how do you switch over at that point?
Generally, what they'll do is most of the better and bigger productions would have a production console. So they'll have one console dedicated to house music, and then they'll have, like, for instance, the house console feeding the production console, and then they'll have guest console lines.
Gotcha.
And usually they're either analog or AES out of there. And then usually we'll spec because there's no longer copper going from front of house to monitor world. It's always like, now it's like 2 lines of Cat 5 and that's it. So it's an awesome time. Yeah, so much easier. And sometimes, and I mean, when we were traveling with the little rig, I would spec it out for them to provide it, and they would just provide it. And then I wouldn't even have to worry about pulling my snake after the show. Because, sometimes you can't do it while the show's going on. And sometimes we needed to leave to go and get on a plane and go somewhere else. So
when you're doing, it's slightly off topic, but when there's a live TV performance like SNL or something else, you were with my friend Josiah a few weeks ago. Do you just sort of stand over the shoulder and advise? Do you mix? Do you
stand and advise? It's an interesting thing. Yeah.
It could be a union thing too, I would think, but
I feel like it's a mixture of primarily, it's usually mostly the union situation that's kind of in a pickle. So,
but all right. So on to Billie Eilish's vocals. I mean, I wonder how do you deal with her soft and wispy delivery? Because I've seen her sing out now. Yeah. And she can. But
it's a sound, that's her sound. And also there's a layer of comfortability, I think, that goes in. And you had mentioned something about in-ears being great. And I actually feel like here's one of the things that's becoming a new thing as for my perspective. I came up with wedges. That was just a part of my life. Right. And if you couldn't sing it, you couldn't get it. You know what I mean? Right. Like if you can't give it, you're not going to get a ton. Right. But the ears are a different thing. You can literally be the quietest person in the world, but you can still hear yourself. Right. And that can also be a little bit of a challenge. So, it's a bit of a struggle. And I tried to get her to do wedges on a couple of the events, and she did it a couple of times, and she was like, I never want to do that again. So I'm like, okay.
Yeah. I know what you're saying, because that was one of the things that Phil Ramone taught me, which was, depending on rhythm, drums, tuning, or vocal dynamics, he would have you mess with the cue without telling the artist. Do you know what I mean? Because it'd be like, you just bring it up a little bit more in the headphones. Don't tell them it's going to sound the same, but they won't sing out,
Yeah, exactly. No, it's absolutely no. And he that's so genius because that is the thing that you have to keep in mind as a front of house guy, especially if you're doing monitors. That is a relationship that you have to understand. Also, when an artist starts a show, what ends up happening is, here's the funny thing, and I've done this 1,000 times. I've done a tour where we were having awesome shows and we weren't having any sound checks, but we had our own desks and everything was the same, right? And then one day they want a sound check and they're like, can you make my vocal louder? And then the show comes out and they're just like off and they don't have a good show. And like, you're just like, what's happening? Where are you? Like you're not, something's not right. You couldn't figure it out. And you're like, it's because they went in and they fixed it. It's like you have this energy that you project, you come out hot, and you have to be able to predict this. And it's hard to do it as a monitor engineer. And it's one of the things that I feel like it's a little easier for the front of house guy to control if you come out hot. But as for her vocal, I have literally gone back and forth between the doing too much or doing too little. And always like blowing it up and starting it all over again and blowing it up. And I was just in the middle of blowing it up again and trying something different because I was just like, here's the crazy thing is people don't think about how, like, first of all, my vocal is the thing everyone came to the show for, right? Yeah. They came to hear her sing. So my mix has always been about the lead singer, but especially so. So my entire mix is literally unity to her. Like she is however loud I make her is how loud my show will be. And now I know I have a good idea of a DBA weighting and a DBC weighting where I should be that I can usually get away with. So last year, luckily she was behind the PA. Now she's in front of the PA, which has been a little bit more challenging. Hence why I'm trying to blow it up and start all over again. But this year, I feel like I've listened to my two-track mixes, which has actually been one of my guiding sources of trying to better myself as an engineer. I've kind of gotten to the point where I'm not only using the desk, but obviously I'm using Super Rack 4 waves. And so what I'll do is I'll have her input channel. And on the first, there's 2 insert points. There's an A and a B, or a 1 or a 2, or however you want to look at it. But on the first insert point, I insert a Super Rack, right? So basically at that point, the audio gets split off and sent to an extreme server, a remote processor. And I use the first in the chain is this plugin I've been trying for just these 3 shows. It's called WNS. You're probably familiar with it. It's that noise suppressor plugin from Waves. It's like a multi-band.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So they use it a lot for like lavaliers to try to remove a room from a mic, usually for like podium kind of stuff.
Right.
And I never really messed with it. Before last year, I was using the PSE. So using an expander, basically a gate that doesn't close, just so I can kind of like let it automatically close when she's not singing because I'm railing the gain on her mic, trying to get
almost like conference room software, where it picks which mic it's gonna play, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. So after that, I started kind of imploring the trick. I can't remember where like it originated, but I remember reading an article about 1176 Fast Attack, kind of a musical release to capture peaks, and then you feed that into an LA2A. Right. So like the LA2A does a little bit of, but you're hitting the peaks with the 1176. So the LA2A isn't getting choked up.
Right.
And so like I'm running those. And then at the end of that chain, I'm using the Sibilance Live plugin just for sibilance overloads, plosives, because of the amount of, processing I'm doing. I start to bring out things that aren't too great. At that point, it returns my console. I have the channel strip EQ bypassed, and then it feeds the onboard compressor. This is where it gets a little weird. So I have a onboard. They have 1176s or DBX 160As, the VUs. They have Valier Dynamite compressors. They have all these different versions. Yeah, like if you want to really screw up a bass, that's a great.
If you want to screw up anything, the Dynamite is the compressor for that.
Yeah, exactly. So the D-Live has a lot of these emulations. So I started trying this crazy idea of parallel compressing her vocal at that point. I did it last year and it's super helpful, and now I'm all about it. But the great thing about that console is not only does it have the 1176 module, but it has a parallel path built into the plugin. So you can have a dry and a wet level. So you can start with 100% dry and then work in the wet. So I went kind of crazy with it. I went all buttons in, fast attack, like kind of I'm not even joking. All buttons in. And literally, so when she kind of yells or she's kind of singing a little strong, it's barely doing like 2 to 5 or whatever. And then I kind of fed it in, and I found a balance for that. I know this is a very dangerous thing for any of you guys that are listening and that's new to sound. This is a very dangerous thing. If you try this and you are not careful, it will blow up. It is literally will make your mic a bomb.
Yeah.
Just a disclaimer, because every time I tell that, every time I'm like, it's a really cool idea. Just be careful, because it can be a really good idea or a really bad idea. It can cost you a gig. So I did that, and her vocal that is doubled because there's a spare vocal mic. So there's like a main vocal mic and a spare vocal mic, and they both feed a master group that gets sent to my mix. So on the group is where I insert yet another situation of a handful of plugins, nothing crazy, but just a F6, the dynamic EQ.
I love the F6.
I'm a huge fan of it. And especially because now it's like with the RTA overlay, if you have problems with feedback, you could really grab it quick.
Right.
And then I follow it at the end of the chain, an X feedback plugin. And the X feedback plugin is a static plugin. It doesn't automatically suppress feedback. But what I use it to do is I usually have a beginning of the day or whatever, if I ever get a chance, when I get the PA tuned, I get everything aligned at 90, where I'm running right now. My show is at 97 dBA all the time. So I just tune my PA at that volume, because that way I can excite the room as much as I can. So that way I know all the ugliness I need to pull out and all the things I don't need to pull out. Because the idea is every little thing is one little fader down. You got to make sure that your gain is literally, when you're doing stuff like this with a vocal that quiet, you have to make sure you have all your ducks in a row.
Right.
So I always tune at the volume I'm going to mix. So that way I know all the ugliness. I pull out the ugliness when the people come in, then I give back the ugliness, and off we go. We have a show. And after I tune it, what I'll do is I'll have one of our PA techs or stage tech go walk the mic into 3 positions on the stage: down, stage center, right, and then stage right and stage left as far as she can under the PA. And then I open up the WNS plugin, which is an expander, and then I bring up the fader just to let the X feedback. If you start the X feedback plugin, you engage it, it will literally, as you bring up the feedback or the fader, it'll find the feedback and it'll do these really surgical, deep, parametric cuts, very surgical. And I find it's a lot more effective than using a graph, because the graph induces a lot more phase. It doesn't seem to be as narrow as this plugin, and it pulls a lot more gain if you do it on a graph. And it's also, because it's human based, it's definitely, there's error involved.
You just leave that locked in once you sort of have
once I do
where
that,
it's going to ring or whatever, you just lock it down.
Exactly.
Right.
So I'll put the mic in those 3 positions. I'll ring it out, and then I'll close my WNS, and generally I can get my fader up to like +5. That means, okay, cool. In a pinch, if I have to push her, I got the room to push her. You know what I mean? Because I don't want to have feedback. And that way I know that my entire show is at the volume I could be at. The only problem is then they added a 50-foot thrust out in front of the PA.
I was going to ask about that, yeah.
And then that catwalk that is literally 30 feet away from the PA that goes all the way up and as wide as the PA. So she can literally be in front of the top boxes, which is, there's literally not a worse place she could possibly be. So I've been able to, this has been working for me. At that point, I was able to survive the catwalk, survive the thrust way better than last year. Last year, I was using a lot more in the lake, trying to basically bring down my entire show volume and set another tab, which is like a page of EQ on top of everything. So when she went out on the thrust, because the thrust is hard. When she does a quiet song on the thrust, a quiet song surrounded by a bunch of kids yelling at 120 dBA, you're like, what am I going to do? Like at that point, your vocal is not, it's either 50% your mix or 50% kids.
Right.
So you're like having to make these decisions tonality wise of like, okay, well, if I boost this, the crowd gets aggressive and it sounds really aggressive. So you're just trying to figure out how to make choices without pulling too much gain. But I don't know whether I have the perfect solution to it, but it's been working. What I would say is when we've started to do some of these award shows with actual, like a show, like a PA and a thing, I usually go out there to make sure the front of house guy is set. And a couple times I was like, all right, I'm not too far off. This isn't me. This isn't easy. I am not doing anything crazy. Cause it's like, to me, it's like when I'm describing this kind of thing, it always feels like, well, it's too much. You just bring it up. And I'm like, yeah, no, it's not quite that situation. I literally last year twice during a show, I was like, I don't know. I don't know what to do. I just bypassed everything. And I was like, maybe it'll just, bypass everything between a song, bring it up and be like, and then I'll try to rework it and then try to do a little bit more on one thing or whatever. And it's like, it's just like everything else, just like recording. It's like not a heavy hand at one thing. It's a bunch of little tiny things, but you got to make sure that the little tiny things aren't causing more problems than they're actually solving.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. Without a doubt. I was thinking about that today doing some mixing, which is, I think, one of the most critical mixing skills is to listen to a track and decide if you need to EQ it. Do you know what I mean? Because the habit is to bring it up and punch in the equalizer, as opposed to just pausing and going, hey, is this okay the way it is? Am I really improving things? So does Phineas bring in plug-in settings that he's got from the record? Are the arrangements different in the show than they are on the record? Does it translate? Does it not? Is it audio files?
So the crazy thing about it is I would say that they did a great job, I think, with the arrangements don't necessarily change as in what part the song is. Usually, like, there's only one song that we actually did on this last run. We actually did mess with the actual original form of. But usually, if you think about it, it's like, okay, well, it's almost like they were like, we're going to add a drummer. The drummer's going to have sample pads, and the drummer's going to play all that electronic stuff.
Right.
But the way that they do it is that they find these points of how to build the song. And then at the end of certain songs, they're like, you know what? We want you to just go into it. So it's like this epic, like, plateau of energy. Right. Because it's like, it is an interesting kind of generation of minimalism. So it's like, okay, what do you do? So as for Finn, his rig is all main stage, believe it or not. Right. So he not only sings backgrounds, he plays a Nord. He's getting program changes on the Nord now. So he's changing Nord patches from song to song. He's also has a synth, like a MIDI synth controller on top of his Nord, his piano. And so he's playing synth as well. Then he has a SPD, but now it's a sampler. It's got 3 sample pads for one song. And then he's also playing acoustic guitar, electric guitar, and bass.
And he was funny on Fallon. I think it was Fallon. Was it Fallon?
Yeah, he was hilarious. Yeah,
he was hilarious. And he looked like he belonged. I was like, geez.
He's very confident. I mean, he's very, and I mean,
he should be.
One of the things, and I mean, that was, I think, one of the things that I'd like to describe to people that don't know. Pop music is a tough genre. Like, it is tough because people are chasing a thing. Sometimes I feel like most of the time you're chasing something that's already been done, right? Yeah. And that's what happens with the A&Rs that come in, and these days they're like, well, we need a hit, we need this, or we need that, and like this. And like, they had so much success from just their SoundCloud stuff. Making fearless music translates. It does. Yeah, kids can spot bullshit. Like, that was it's a fascinating thing to be a part of, because the confidence in what they're doing is beyond me. I don't even understand. Like, Billie will come out and she's not afraid, but she's not aggressive, but she will be like, no, I don't want that. I want this. I want visuals. She's directing her own music videos. She's usually with them editing the videos themselves and doing the cuts. These are her ideas. What translates when she's at a show or watching the show during rehearsal, like she'll go to our lighting guy, Tony, and be like, I want to do this. I want to do that. And like, no, I want more of this kind of thing. And she knows exactly what she wants. It's not like she doesn't know. She knows exactly what she wants.
I mean, for me, being in the business as long as I've been in it, one thing that amazes me more today than it did 20 years ago is when I see a musician, somebody creative, musician, a writer, whatever, do what they do. Like, there's a part of my brain that doesn't actually believe anybody's really that good. And then I go in the studio and I go, but it's not like I doubt them or I think they're phony, but it's just like I'm so impressed and so in awe of musical talent that it still goes like, man, how the fuck do they know to do that? It's still pretty amazing. It's just like the real deal. All right, so a few more technical questions just to cover all the technical stuff. So how big is the system that you're currently traveling with? I mean,
so right now we're talking the main hang, we're talking per side. I think it was 14 K1 and Ford on the down hang. So 18 boxes is per side. And then the subs, this is an interesting thing that I really appreciate.
Who's the company that's providing the speakers?
So it's a combination of Claire and Britt Rowe, but it's primarily Britt Rowe because it's Acoustics. And then we got the entire crew from Pink. And what better system engineer than the guy with a headset mic flying around an arena in front of the top boxes? I'm like, perfect. So this guy, Johnny Carroll, is actually taking care of me this year. And he opted. So when we were kind of talking about a design, he wasn't fully part of it, but it was partially his design that we settled on. But he did a cardioid sub configuration, but instead of having the speakers, the subs firing directly forward, he kind of 45-degree angled them. So they were covering between the aux hangs. And the aux hangs were 8/8. And if you're not familiar with the K1 box, I can't remember what they go down to, but I assure you they go as low as 35, which is insane for a big PA. So to me, I have gotten to the point in my career where, do I like the sound of flown subs all the time? No. Have I heard it done really well? Yes. Do I know what the difference between sound check and show is? Yes. And I do prefer flown subs, because what ends up happening is you get all these people standing in front of your subs. You're going to change the way that excursion and that way that push and pull. And to me, Billie cares about that. Huge. She wants low end. So I was like, I want to get 90% of my show out of the air. I want a ton of low end, coming from the air and filling the entire arena. My goal was, I told Johnny, I was like, listen, my goal is, in a perfect world, I want the 100 seats and the 200 seats getting their ass kicked. That's what I want, because I think that would be the best for the show, because that's where all the exciting part is. We're not pushing SPL and being super loud. It's that low end energy that's exciting, even on their records. So he did this thing where he kind of 45-degreed these subs, which were usually like 3 firing forward, 1 firing back, 3 firing forward, 1 firing back, with that one being on the bottom. And that's supposed to help keep all the low end energy off the stage, but also project most of the low end energy forward. And the cool thing about that is now you're talking about that lobe on each side being between the aux hang. So now you're covering it. And I didn't really catch it until we got into the first load-in show day, and I was sitting there and I was like, this is genius. But the problem is, in the rehearsals, it took a little while for him to get it to hit me the way I want floor subs. Because I told him, I was like, listen, it sounds great everywhere else. I'm not there yet. I'm not feeling it. Like, it feels like it's a little warbly, like I'm 95 and 110s running away from me. I'm not getting that that punch at 60. Like I was kind of like, I want it to feel like there's ground subs punching me in the face. And he did a couple other changes. It took a couple days. And then the day before the last rehearsal day, he had made some changes and introduced the floor subs in, because we had 8 floor subs on the ground. So like a total of 24 subs total. And then that doesn't count the K1 SBs. We actually had 2 K1 SBs, which are 2 dual 15-inch subwoofers on each top of the arrays. So there's a lot of low end in the rig, but it was just trying to get it to, because I told him, I was like, listen, priorities are the seats, but with a sold out Billie Eilish show, you never know who's standing in front of house.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it has to sound amazing here. Like I'm no longer going to be that engineer. Be like, no, I'm going to mix for on access with the PA, because that way I cover 60% of the room instead of 30. No, it's like, now it's like you have, you know, Lars Ulrich coming out, Matthew McConaughey coming out. You have like all these huge stars coming out to like watch this show. Like Dave Grohl's been to like 4 shows of ours, you know, like Butch Vig was behind me like at one of our shows. I'm like, you're talking about like, okay, I'm not going to fuck around. Like it has to sound good. So whatever we're doing, it's got to translate everywhere else. And he managed to hit it. Like we had 2 really great shows and 1 pretty good show. Like, and it's a growing process, because he's also learning how I like tune and what my preferences are, because we're both kind of like looking at the microscopic version of what we're doing. So sometimes it's a bit hard to come in the middle, but I've never done so little to a PA. I
how many watts?
Wait to get back to work. Watts? I don't even know. I couldn't even
more.
tell you.
Too many.
so much. So many amps. If you saw the amp racks, you'd laugh. Like there's just 2 huge carts. Like probably, I want to say they weren't 16 tall. They had to have been 24 tall. Yeah. Huge 24 dual, actually 4 banks of 24, all in this gigantic moving single cart. Literally the width of a freaking semi, and 2 of them for each side to take care of all the amps and networking.
What is your mix rig? What's at your mix position?
So currently I'm using an Allen & Heath D-Live S5000. And I'm basically, the only pieces of outboard gear are 2 extreme servers for Waves. And I'm running Super Rack, the newest version, with Waves version 11. And then I'm also using an atomic clock, and it was actually the 10MX, I believe, is a new one, this 1U, and then a couple lakes, and that's it. The lake is a system EQ, right. And I haven't actually even used it. For the first time ever, I'm opting to. I always try to like play by the system guys, you know. Like, for instance, Johnny, when we met, he was like, hey, can you just send me a left-right? And I'm like, well, I would prefer to do left-right sub-fill, because that's normally what I do. But because I was going to get 90% of my show out of the air, and when you do flown subs, you want to tie them in to the left and the right. So like the left sub, it's like a full range left and a full range right. You actually get better coverage and less anomalies if you don't do a mono block, 2 different mono blocks, because then you get more cancellation. So he was like, you want to go left, right? And I'm like, yeah, sure. I'll try it. And so far he's been killing it. So I haven't even been using my own lakes in my rig. He has another lake rig, which literally has all the modules for the whole PA. So I usually work off his tablet. So
what do you think is the most common mistake you see live sound mixers doing?
I think the new school is in. The new school is, I want a record. I want to sound like the record. It's no longer, hey, this is just a really solid sounding live show. No, they want the moon. They want everything. They know that the plugins are available. They know that we could do automation. They know they could send MIDI timecode to your desk if they wanted to. So it's like, it's a fascinating world where it's challenging because it makes us have to mix that same way. And I think that some engineers don't, if you're not careful of the way that you're routing your speakers and careful of how you set up things, and if you don't utilize all the the certain technologies out there, I think it's a mistake. Like I have the drummer, he's literally taking my left-right mix. And I love this because guys used to be afraid of this. They were like, no, don't take my 2-track off my left-right. It sounds terrible. Like it's just a board mix. It doesn't sound right. Or some guys will be like too much reverb or too much this and too much that. And I've gotten to the point where I challenge that theory. I say, no, you can actually make it sound good both ways. And if you can figure out how to do that, you can actually bounce between the small and the big world. You can actually send out a mix that you could be proud of to a broadcast feed when you're doing say a festival.
What is the best sounding live show you've heard?
Oh, I know this. Metallica, Big Mick, Rose Bowl. It was a Midas Pro X, I believe. He mixes on. And I will say too, Lars probably doesn't make it very easy for him. Probably, I would say it's a bit of a challenge to probably rein him in a little bit. But the thing that was so powerful about his mix, I daydream about his low mids, the use of 100 to 300 hertz. It was just like this air. The guitars, when they were chunk, they were just punching you in the knees. And the guitars were working with the bass to punch you in the knee and all that power in the low mids. And I remember thinking to myself, I've never heard anyone mix like this. This is special. This is like, because you think about, and I have my own theories of like the evolution of a front of house guy. You start out because you can make a vocal sound good, right? And then you can get the balances, right? And then all of a sudden the sound guy figured out how to mix a kick drum, and then you have a live sound, everyone knows it. It's like the vocal sounds good, the kick drum is massive, and then everything else is just kind of like, eh. And then you figure out the 200 hertz, that 200 hertz cut that some guys do in everything. They're like, oh, I can clean up an arena this way. And you can. 200 is so hard to get in a big boomy room. Like, right. Yeah. So like, people dump it, and then all of a sudden you get this mix that's like kind of like, it's really clean. You can hear everything clearly, but you're not feeling everything.
Right.
You're feeling the drums.
Right.
And you're not really, but things don't have body or shape or feel. And like, I feel like that evolution is where you kind of, in that segue, you're understanding compression and release times and understanding how to make the speakers push and pull. I think it's like I chase that idea in my head of what his mix sounds like. But what I always say is I appreciate that question, because that's a question that I ask everybody. Whenever I talk to somebody, it's like, what's the best sounding mix? Because that is something that I think is such a special thing. What is your favorite mix? What's your favorite live show you've ever seen?
Well, see, it's easier now. It was a couple. No, I think in-ears are the big difference. I think the systems have got, like, I don't think what you were saying about making a live sound like a record, I don't think that was really possible 15 years ago.
Yeah, but I don't think it is. Yeah.
And the speakers are higher, cleaner, higher fidelity, more power in the systems, and I think in-ears make a huge difference. It was Steely Dan. I saw Steely Dan. Have you seen them?
No, I haven't.
But
I have not.
For me, in a recording studio, 90% of a great sounding record is the musician and the arrangement. So they were starting with great material to begin with, but it was
Keith
Carlock.
Oh my God! The first time I saw him, he came through Rockwood and did a gig for somebody, and I saw him, and I was in that Rockwood stage 1 above him, right. And it was my mind was blown. Like, he's phenomenal. And no mics on that kit. Like, he was making that drum I was just like, it's so good.
His pocket is just so
it's
amazing.
Ridiculous.
My next question is, all right, so there's a young guy starting out. He's in a place like the size of Rockwood. It sounds like crap. Yeah. And he's panicking and he's sweating. Any words of advice to a guy starting out, and he puts up the faders and he goes, man, this doesn't sound like the Billie Eilish show.
Well, I would say first get that vocal right. Turn everything down and get that vocal right. That's the first thing, because I guarantee you, like, that was one thing Ken always nailed into my head. He was like, listen, no one can hear that vocal. You could have the best mix in the world. You're still going to be told your mix sucks.
Right.
It's the most important thing. People pay to hear and see the person sing. So vocal first, and that is your way into those tours anyways, because let's be honest, like the vocal is probably one of the hardest things to start out when you're like a struggling artist, like you're beginning and like you have to go and like work with people that aren't getting paid a whole lot and don't have a whole lot of experience. Your vocal is probably going to get the most mangled out of everything. You know what I mean? Your vocal, you're just like, this is awful. Like it's feeding back. It hurts. It's loud, but it doesn't, nothing makes sense. Like get the vocal to sound good, because then the singer will do what they do and they'll take care of you and the rest will fall into place.
Right.
So
cool.
yeah.
All right, man. This has been fantastic. I appreciate
Awesome.
you giving me the time.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to doing a bunch of these. It should be good. Should be a good. You're
Awesome.
a good way to kick this off. I appreciate it, man. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, man.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more like it, please click subscribe. I also have a Patreon link below. Thank you.